Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Francis Marshall from Sagos UK, and we have a brilliant webinar for you today, all about micro-learning and using micro-learning to transform global performance. You'll get the chance to ask questions. Please use the chat box for that, and our moderators will collect the questions, and at the end we'll answer as many as we possibly can. So to help me today, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Agnes from Aptar. Nice to see you, Agnes. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Great to see you too, Francis.
Perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the nuts and bolts of what you've been doing.
Of course. So my background is in sales. I've had a sales career in packaging for more than 20 years. And I've also been involved more recently with Aptar in our corporate university learning and development and HR department, focusing on sales related training with a special interest in e-learning and micro-learning. So delighted that we've got the opportunity to talk about that today.
And the opportunity to talk about what you've been doing, which is super. So that's really interesting, making that commercial shift from being a frontline salesperson into the training and development world. How did you find that?
A fantastic experience. I think curiosity and questioning skills, which are such an important part of being a salesperson, really lend themselves to being in a development role. And of course, when you've had a certain degree of experience, you want to give back and share that experience with others and also learn from others. So I think I've learned more being a trainer and a personal development person than having been in the sales role, because you learn so much from your participants and your fellow colleagues.
Yeah, no, my story's the opposite to yours, actually. I worked in training, and the only course that they could give me to teach, this was in the world of banking, was selling. So I taught selling for 3 or 4 years, and at the end of it they said, we realize you've never actually sold, and so they put me out in the real world. But that training absolutely worked. I always believed it worked, but I'd never used it. And having a true commercial background really adds a resonance to any work that you do as a people leader or people developer these days.
Definitely.
So great to meet you. Thanks for giving up your valuable time. And I know that this is going to be an inspiration to everybody on the call. So this is our journey. This is what we're going to cover. So we're going to start with why the program, find out more about the company as well. Talk about the what. So, what did you have to do to get to the point where you were then able to design and develop? So there's your how. And the rest of it is very much about doing and the impact of the learning. So if you're okay with that, we'll just use that as our route map, but please don't worry if we come off it, because it'll just be interesting anyway, and we'll go with the flow. I should have said to everybody, we'll talk for 30 to 40 minutes and then we'll take the questions. We always have a drop dead finish so that people can get back to their normal day jobs. But this is going to be fast and furious. Grab your notepads or whatever it is you're going to use, and here we go. So not everybody will have heard of Aptar. So before we talk about the program and the context for that, maybe you can tell us a bit about Aptar, who they are, what they do, where we might see them.
Of course. So Aptar, you're absolutely right, isn't necessarily a household name, and yet all of you, no doubt, have an average of 6 or 7 of our products in your household without realizing it, because we manufacture delivery systems and devices for a number of markets in the pharmaceutical market, in beauty, home care, food and beverage products. And these are typically, for example, if you go into your kitchen, you might have a hand sanitizer that has one of our lotion pumps, or you might be using one of our condiment flip top closures when you're barbecuing on your balcony or outside in your garden. You might, when you're needing to refresh yourself after a thirsty workout, have one of our sports closures on a beverage product, or using some of our pharma products if you are needing to have some health relief or treatments, whether it's asthma with inhaler products, or injectables for additional skin treatments or dermal treatments. So a whole range of food, beverage, beauty and home and pharma products that you'll be familiar with, even if you might not be familiar with our name, Aptar.
And that, Agnes, is a much better description than I was given by our very own consultant many years ago when I asked what Aptar did. And I remember the look on his face, and he said, it's in every supermarket in the country, which of course it's in every supermarket probably globally, but that explains it. So remind me, what are the three big divisions? You've got pharma,
food and beverage, and beauty and home.
Okay, so some similarity, but also quite distinct in their own personality and ways of doing things.
Indeed. So pharma, obviously, they're looking at a much longer term horizon. The development of drug devices and products takes a lot of development time, going through regulatory requirements to be safe for our consumers and patients. Whereas food and beverage and beauty and home may be shorter life cycles, more dynamic because the products are developed over a shorter time horizon. But the quality of the products and the way that we're developing our products with our customers in mind is a very common theme across all of the three segments.
Excellent, great. Well, thank you for that. And in terms of going on with the context, I'm guessing this has a sales context as well. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about the background to why you wanted to develop a program for sales.
Sure. So we already had an in-person training, sales-related training on our sales process that was cross-segment, targeted our sales personnel. We'd been running that since somewhere around 2016, 2017. It was a 2.5-day in-person training, which was getting a lot of interest from our sales personnel to help them drive their opportunities through their pipeline and be very customer focused to understand customers' needs. Of course, then we recognized that this classroom training or in-person training needed some reinforcement and refreshment. Like all of us, when we go through training, you may have a great deal of knowledge that you can absorb in that 2.5-day or 3-day training, but you just then need to have that reinforcement afterwards. And so we were curious about how could we do that. And we were aware of microlearning as being a potential platform and technology and methodology for helping reinforce the training that we were doing. So we investigated that in 2019, and we're looking at how can we bring this to life with a microlearning experience. So that's where that project started, and delighted we were able to connect with Sagos along the way.
Right, okay, so, and we'll come to that a little bit later as well. So in a way, we were almost, there was the face-to-face piece, but then it's how do you keep it alive? You know, how do we avoid the forgetting curve? If you look at all the research that's coming out now, a period of forgetting is so important because then that reminder works. But I know you've built other things around it, which we'll show to people later, that actually then really cemented it. Just out of interest, without going to the final bit, which is about the feedback you got on it and everything, but generally, was there a hunger for this kind of program or not really? They felt they'd done the training and that was it, or?
So it's interesting that during the course of the training, we had several of our commercial excellence and sales leaders that were saying, look, we're investing in this training. We need to find a way of reinforcing it and making sure it's stickable to people's memories. And so we got into a tough time where we were being asked to send endless email reminders with learning nuggets and content on a week-by-week basis to our participants after they'd been in the training. And it was just too time-consuming. But feedback was, we like these learning nuggets. We like having short bursts of knowledge being refreshed. So there was clearly an appetite for this kind of micro-learning setting where you're getting pulses of learning in short bursts over a period of time. And that's when the appetite was beginning to come, because people were saying, we'd love to reinforce our knowledge. We don't have the time to go endlessly to workshops and classroom training. Can we find a way of doing this in our own time as part of our workflow? Just 10, 15 minutes, 2 or 3 times a week, because it will help us reinforce our learning. So that's where the micro-learning seed of an idea came from our business stakeholders and learners and participants, saying that's the kind of pace of learning they'd like for a refresher.
And when that came, what was your experience within the business of doing that kind of thing?
So we were
guess
aware of, I'm sorry, Francis, you were going to ask a further question.
I was saying this is feeding us into the next bit about how you've set the project up in a way, but carry on. Sorry.
Sure. And yes, with the idea of microlearning being something we were aware of as a technology, and we'd been to fairs and various technology conferences, and there was a buzz about it in the industry. And we were probably a little bit late to it, but we're now nonetheless curious. We then recognized that we could look at our sales process training, bring a pilot around to microlearning, and then we started looking at potential vendors. And there was a short list of vendors that had very robust platforms and could provide the kind of hub where you could launch the learning, but they didn't necessarily have the educational heritage. And that's where we needed help, because while Aptar and our own corporate university has a learning and development piece, we really wanted to benefit from a vendor that had not only the technology and the capability in terms of microlearning deployment, but also had a rich understanding of learning and development and training. And so the shortlist soon came down to one, and essentially our partnership with Sagos sprung from that, because we recognized you could deliver on the microlearning technology piece, but also you could help us with the learning and development piece with a rich collateral of both subject matter experts in your team, as well as content that could help enhance the own tools and templates we had.
Yeah. And what you said there resonates with me, because we do this in our learning and development. We find something shiny and new, and we have a go at it. And I think that's just a real tribute to everybody who's prepared to try stuff, take chances, succeed or fail fast. It doesn't matter, we're doing things differently. But we had the similar experience back in 2000. Everyone was talking about LMSs and e-learning and things like that. And so we sent a group of people from Sagos to Atlanta to a conference about it. And they came back and said, it's all about technology. There's nothing about learning. There's nothing about pedagogy. There's nothing about how people learn. It's just about a delivery channel. So we sat on the fence ourselves for a little while as well. And it took 2 or 3 years before clients like Orange and France Telecom and L'Oreal started coming to us and say, you know, we want to do exactly what you've just described. We want to blend this technology with some good educational practice or training practice. And that's where we started to get into it. So you're right, they're tools that need to be managed and developed and used in a certain way that is going to deliver value for the organization.
Exactly.
So, yeah, no, I appreciate what you said there. Thank you very much. But then, of course, the hard work really starts, doesn't it? getting into it. So should we start with stakeholders? Because I said at the beginning, I noticed you've got the 3 big areas of the business. It can't have been easy. Have I lost you?
Still here.
Ah, okay, I've lost my screen. Okay, it can't have been easy to manage across diverse stakeholders.
Right.
So can you tell us a bit about how you went about that while I try and get my screen back? Here we go.
Of course. So you're absolutely right that any shiny new thing, as you mentioned earlier, needs to be endorsed by experts and stakeholders within the business. Otherwise, it will have that initial sort of interest, and then it will fall flat very quickly. So once we'd established we wanted to do a pilot with Sagos, we needed to really then develop a robust program based on our own content, but also working with stakeholders from Aptar to endorse it. So we very quickly worked with our commercial excellence steering committee to identify key sales leaders who could help us with the development of the pilot. And we got key sales leaders, one from beauty and home, one from food and beverage, and one from pharma, who were able to then help us develop the content and review it as part of the test procedures before we launched it with a small cross-segment pilot group. So those stakeholders and subject matter experts were helping us with the design and development, and then the pilot group were helping us to review the content, test it out, and also then give us vital feedback before we did a bigger rollout and launch. And that small test group of around 40 or so, 30, 40 people from across the different segments and the different regions, they really helped us hone in on the best practice for microlearning. We in fact tested it in 2 small groups. We had one running through the program over a 6-week period and another running it over the same content over a 10-week period. And we soon decided that in fact the 6 weeks was the perfect length of that course, because after more weeks, the 10-week, you were beginning to lose people's engagement. It was a bit too long a program. So we came to that conclusion from the pilot. And then we got fantastic video testimonials from the pilot group saying how much they gained from the experience. And then they were able to help endorse it for future people going through the rollout.
And so that was the learner's experience. What about the stakeholders? How did they feel going through this? Because it was across disciplines, wasn't it? So were they fully engaged? Were they just watching and waiting to see whether it was good or bad? How was that?
It did require quite a bit of communication. So we were regularly having project meetings with our steering committee throughout the test process of the pilot to give them an update on what was happening, giving them feedback from the participants, allowing them to ask questions, and helping to make suggestions how we could refine the content moving forward. And I think that regular dialogue with our steering committee and with our global leadership teams really helped to bring the concept to life, because there was a curiosity about microlearning, and they were beginning to get the idea that this could actually really reinforce the investment that they'd made in training, and see some of the opportunities for measurement of the knowledge retention over time. So I think that was a great experience for our stakeholders and leaders as well, to see that this could be applicable to not just sales but other disciplines in the future.
Yeah, cool. And in terms of the development, how did you go about the design and the development to make sure it was going to actually deliver what you needed?
We worked very closely with both the subject matter experts from Aptar that I mentioned earlier to take the vital tools and templates we already had from our classroom training and bring them to life on the Learning Hub with Sagos, and then also work very closely with your project team. We had a kick-off and then several regular meetings to say, what should the learning journey look like? How should the content be mixed? Because like many of your clients, I'm sure we have to be very mindful of our budget, and we wanted to customize it, but we also didn't have an endless resource to create a lot of video content or scenarios. And so some of your existing collateral helped us tremendously, because you were able to leverage your existing learning resource to help enhance some of our tools and templates to create a very comprehensive program and make it engaging, because we wanted video, we wanted scenarios, quizzes. There was a leaderboard with point scoring opportunities for the salespeople, which is always great because a bit of friendly competition always spices up the learning. So all of those elements, with your advice and support, really made a difference to creating a very well-rounded program.
Great. Okay. Well, that's fantastic. I know people will want to know what was the program. But before we get there, this wasn't just something you were delivering in the UK, was it?
No, it was a global project involving all our 5 main geographical regions.
So how many people were you trying to touch with this, or ultimately will you touch with this? I guess probably a better question.
Sure. So as we mentioned, we started with a very small group, but that was just the start pad and launch pad for a much bigger group. We have around 250 salespeople worldwide across the 3 segments, of which many of them have now, through the rollout, started engaging with the content. So we've now had 50 last year and another 50 this quarter going through the same microlearning experience. And of course, it doesn't stop there, because these are not just applicable for salespeople, but customer-facing personnel generally who want to equip themselves better to be able to navigate through an opportunity with a customer. So I see its potential for customer service, our internal sales force, marketing, our R&D, all of these individuals who are having regular dialogue with customers and want to be better equipped for those discussions with their clients.
And did you foresee the broader application at the design stage, or is that an additional benefit that's come?
I think we'd already foreseen the application to sales across the regions and potentially other functions related to sales. What's been a pleasant surprise for us now that we've been presenting this microlearning to our global leadership teams is some of our leaders have been asking, well, what's the applicability for functions like our operations personnel, because they're highly involved in site manufacturing. And they need to have a way of reinforcing their learning in the workplace, and to be able to, as part of their work, use a mobile phone or a tablet and to be able to access knowledge in short bursts without taking away their vital time from their manufacturing role is beginning to show itself in some interest from our business.
That's great. It almost sounds like a learning organization or a learning culture is growing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, look, I know if I was sat watching, I'd want to know look at the program. So this is it. Now, how many programs look a bit like this? But I know this has got a lot of special things in it. So why don't you just talk us through the program, please?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we concluded from the pilot that a 6-week cadence or length of program would work well with this particular sales course. And it's a sales process training that, as I mentioned earlier, takes the sales personnel through a refresher on our in-person training to help guide them through how do they go about discovering their opportunities, how do they understand the way that customers are making decisions, are they well prepared for their meetings and their interactions with customers, so we include various tools. Are they able to ask some really powerful high-gain questions to be able to understand customers' needs? And then are they able to deliver powerful value messages to customers in order to win business? So it's that process of steps to take them through the execution of an opportunity. And what we did was, from the pilot experience, we recognized that self-paced learning in itself needed some additional support, because our salespeople, like many of us, don't naturally necessarily want to spend time just by themselves, the calendar in the diary, self-paced learning. So the enhancement that really helped us from Sagos was to blend it with a live event, both a kickoff to help the participants join as a cohort, but mid-course and end of course having a coaching clinic with a Sagos tutor to help bring some of the content to life and have a live dialogue between the learning cohorts so that they could interact with one another along their learning journey. So I think that really helped. And then there's a rhythm with every single lesson that they have a learning content, so something to learn. And then they have an activity or tool or model to download. And then most importantly, we're asking them to do something. So there's activity-based actions that they have to submit and prove that they've done with an implementation journal that takes them along their journey, so that they have evidence that supporting their learning, that they show and agree with their supervisor, and then submit to Sagos for tutor assessment in order to get their learning certificate. So it's not passive, it's very active, asking them to really take some activities and actions together, as well as making sure that they have a learning cohort. They can chat to one another, not just in the coaching clinics, but on the forum where they can post questions. The tutor asks provocative questions to help guide their knowledge, and it creates that cohort of learning. So I think that's been a great enhancement of the pilot, making it more of this blended learning experience.
I love that phrase, they've all got the same rhythm. I like that. So the learn, I hope people really captured what you were saying there. You know, learn it, that's short and sharp and sweet, I'm guessing. But then get the tools and then do something. So there's digitization, there's human interaction, and there's transfer to the workplace.
Exactly.
And that becomes a habit, I guess, after you've done this for 6 weeks. What was people's reaction to being expected so much to transfer learning into their day-to-day job?
It's a fascinating question, because I think for some, they were a bit taken aback, because they probably had thought, oh, I'm going to be sitting in front of some kind of YouTube video and I can just learn in my own time something nice and visual. And oh my goodness, I'm being asked to do something now. How shocking. But once they realized that that was what was required of them, I think they recognized that there was value in it. And we got some very nice anecdotal evidence and stories from people saying, I've used the meeting preparation template. I've just had a meeting with a customer and it was so much more effective because I'd actually prepared the agenda in advance. I prepared my questions. I knew what my objectives were, and I was thinking about it from the customer's point of view. So it just really resonated with a lot of individuals to say, you know, I'm now thinking in a more process-oriented way to bring what maybe intuitively they knew was the right way of dealing with a customer, but they needed to bring it to a more conscious understanding.
Yeah, and guess consistency comes into it. And,
yes.
And it is a win-win for your customer or clients as well, isn't it? In terms of they're being managed in a more professional way, I guess.
Exactly, and they feel that they're having a more effective business consultant discussion with us rather than being sold to. They're helping to buy, and that's a very different mentality.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for taking us through that.
You're welcome.
I just love the rhythm. I love the way it was fully supported. It's a completely rounded program. But my next question is very unfair and a bit cheeky. But when did you start imagining that you wanted to go down this way? What was it? Was it 2018, 2019? When did you start having this vision coming to you about what you wanted to do?
I think it was probably in 2018. It was about 2 years into our sales process in-person training, which was getting a lot of buzz. People were really enjoying the training, and we were thinking, you know, we're expending a lot of resource on this training, and now it's a little bit depressing because no one's actually talking to us about the tools that they were told about in the training. We thought we need to do something to continue to bring this to life. And as I mentioned earlier, I was being asked to send endless emails to people just to remind them, oh, you were in this course a month ago, what are you doing now to bring this to life? And it was just too time wasting for me to do it in that very manual way. And it wasn't very engaging for the learners. So I think the gem of the idea came then, because we recognized we need to reinforce our investment in our training. We want our salespeople to feel that they've had some value out of it and are actually using it to be more effective in their day-to-day work.
Great. Well, that explains it, because I thought on camera I might see a crystal ball somewhere, because of course COVID has happened, hasn't it? And it's almost like the perfect solution in a COVID situation. So how has this supported Aptar during this particular crisis or situation that we're in?
I mean, in a very difficult situation for the world, it's become something quite fortunate that we've been able to have a micro-learning course already piloted in 2019 and ready to roll. Because yes, you're absolutely right. When the COVID crisis started early last year, and we recognized that we weren't going to be having people coming to in-person training for quite some time, we knew we were going to have to transform ourselves to an online presence. And so now we were having to think, can we use this content not just as a reinforcement for people who've already been through the training, but actually as a micro course in its own right? And so very fortunately, we'd already had the prescience to put a couple of people into the pilot who'd never done the sales process training before, just to test out, would it work with a completely fresh audience? Right. And unfortunately, they were able to follow the program because it was explanatory enough and step by step where they were able to understand the content. So now we're in the situation early last year where we could get people joining Aptar as new sales recruits, having micro-learning as part of their onboarding, or being able to join it even if they'd already been on similar sales related programs, to be able to come to something, because they were understandably feeling frustrated that they were now in a situation they couldn't see their customers face to face, but they needed some, and they couldn't go to training face to face, and they needed still the tools and tricks and the ideas to bring their knowledge to life and help them in front of their customers. And so now microlearning is forming a very useful platform and technology and training methodology to help those individuals with their personal development.
So it's great to see that the broadening of the application of it, but also it's made you quite agile, I think, in terms of how you can respond to things. If you think about your traditional onboarding and your traditional sales training, and now here there's something that's more flexible, more timely, more cost effective. So
absolutely. I mean, it won't be a substitute for in-person training ultimately, because we'll have still the opportunity, hopefully, in the future to come back to in-person training. But the world will, I think, permanently change, and we need to be agile, to your point. And if we can find ways of giving a more diversity of training formats for people, so that they have this really wonderful mix and hybrid between in-person training, online training, e-learning, micro-learning, they all provide a very diverse opportunity for personal development.
They do, but also remember, but they need your rhythm too. The learn it, the get the tools, and then apply it to the workplace, which I would guess is probably one of the critical success factors for this program, because, you know, like you said, people might expect to just watch a YouTube video and it becomes, well, I never information, or it's filed in a drawer, or it's shared with their friends if it's funny, or whatever it is. Whereas actually there's a purpose, a true piece of transfer. So what sort of return on experience can you share with us? Obviously there's commercial confidentiality here, but what sort of things could you share so that other people could see the benefits of wrapping micro-learning with the other elements of the rhythm?
Sure. So there's very much a mindset that's needed. So individuals have to take responsibility for their own learning. And I think that's something that with online learning of any description, if we can have that rhythm that you mentioned of the learn something, download something, then actually have to do something, it makes us more accountable for our learning, and not just for the sake of it, but because it's actually going to help us be more effective. When people see value in it, they're more likely to do it. So the endorsement of individuals who've already gone on the program helps tremendously attract others to come to microlearning and say, I want some of this as well, because I've seen my partners and colleagues have already been through it. But also we put in some measurements specifically in the course itself to help take an account of what we thought was going to be the transfer and the knowledge uplift. So in this course, at the very beginning, they take a quiz or assessment, and they have to take the same course and quiz assessment at the end, and then we measure their knowledge uplift. So we're looking and expecting to see them retaining additional learning from being through the course. So that's the first thing that we measure. We're then also, with the implementation journal that I mentioned earlier, asking them to submit evidence of what they've taken away and used, and it's signed off by their manager. And then they have to submit that to the Sagos tutor for assessment before they get the certificate. So that implementation journal is again another form of accountability. It's not to put them under pressure necessarily, but just to say, there's a reason for this course. We'd like to just check that you are taking away something valuable from it and being able to be more effective as a result. And longer term, what we want to do is continue to do a longer term survey 6 months down the line to check again to see what's being retained over a longer period of time. So that's something that we're still planning, and always looking for other ideas to challenge ourselves how we can assess transfer to the workplace. And certainly some of the video testimonials and anecdotal stories that we're getting from some of the participants are suggesting that there are other measurements we can take to see, are they driving their opportunity pipeline more successfully as a result of being on some kind of micro learning.
Excellent. And if I can just go back to the implementation journal, because you said that I think it was Andy and Ramiz were working with you, weren't they? And they,
that's right, yes.
And they were challenging, but when it comes to implementation, that's the bit where a lot of people get stuck. So was it a mixture of, here's some suggestions, or directions, I don't know, and then some room for them to maneuver and come up with their own things to do? What sort of things would people have implemented, and what kind of evidence might you have seen?
So, for example, they had to submit an example of a meeting preparation template that they completed to show evidence that they'd actually prepared for a customer meeting. And so that was something that we were encouraging all the learners to do. Yeah. Or they were having to answer a series of questions to say, have I assessed my opportunity to say, does it fit with our strategy and our scope? And do I understand the people within the decision-making unit or network at my customer? So they're having to do a certain series of validated questions that then they submit as a tool into the implementation journal. So most of it was guided, but nonetheless, we're always open to suggestions from our participants. So this is why we want to do this longer term survey, to make sure that individuals can guide us to what else would they want to see apart from what we've suggested to them in the implementation journal that would help bring the learning to life.
Excellent. That was fantastic. Thank you for taking us through that, Agnes. We have got some questions coming in. If I may just take a little bit longer and ask you a couple.
Of course.
One of them is saying, yeah, great program, and actually pretty robust in terms of the way it's put together and the way it operates. But now that you're stood here in 2021, looking back, what might you have done differently at any of the stages of the project? What might you have done differently with hindsight?
I think we would have looked at how can we ensure that individuals recognise the importance of pacing their learning, because we designed this program to be a 6-week course with certain milestones, and we were still finding that there's always this human nature that individuals, they don't have time in their first week or second week, so they're catching up in the third, fourth week, and suddenly there's a rush to go through all the lessons by the end. So yeah, what we're wanting to do is see if we can encourage the learning cohorts to really discipline themselves and put time with myself in their calendars, because we know what it's like. We're all crazy busy, and if you don't book that learning time and that development time and have some kind of discipline and rhythm in your calendar, you're suddenly having to catch up. And digesting learning in a last-minute cram is not as effective as pacing it as part of your workflow. So that's something we would reinforce as part of our communication and kickoff, and then continue to get more stakeholder involvement, because it would be great for our sales leaders to be going through the same micro course and micro learning as their participants. And in fact, we've got the first example of that with this latest cohort, where one of our senior leaders who's just joined the company is actually going through the learning with the rest of his group, which is great because they're transparently learning from each other. There's no concern about, oh, I've got someone senior in the room and someone junior in the room. Am I going to feel self-conscious about my learning? Instead, it's this cohort working together collaboratively and learning from each other. No matter how senior they are, there's always something more that you can learn. And I think it's a humility of our Aptar personnel to encourage to be in that learning environment with their team members.
Yeah, no, I think that's really nice. And lifelong learning is a secret to happiness, or one of them. So, but no, that's great. Okay, another one, slightly more complicated one actually. So, how did you deal with any cultural differences or differences in terms of how people engage when you're doing a global program, but it's in such a digital micro way?
So one of the things that we did just simply from a linguistic point of view is we decided that the course would be in English, so that a learning cohort could learn together no matter which time zone and culture and country they were in. And our salespeople tend to have as a second language or first language English at a very good level. So that was the first decision that we made, but nonetheless, we're trying to encourage, where possible, groups from a region working together. So at the moment, we've had a learning cohort from Europe and Middle East, and they are working together quite often, sharing experiences in the forum, because they're working potentially with similar cultures or with similar customer habits, then they can learn from one another that way. And then that becomes not something that we're prescribing. It's actually the cohort themselves advising and supporting one another. Because I think if you have that kind of prescription from on high, from someone who's, let's say, an English person like myself, it doesn't resonate. But if you're learning from each other because you're in a similar cultural environment, that's very powerful.
Yeah, I like that very much. Good. Okay, just checking. That's the questions for now. For me, Agnes, I want to say thank you on behalf of everyone, but especially me, because I've learned a lot today. I've learned that if you just stick microlearning in, it may or may not happen, and some will stick. But what we've learned are what are the vital ingredients of making something stick. You know, the learn, the get the tools, practice, and transfer to the workplace. Human interaction, absolutely important to keep it going, whether it's from a tutor or a trainer or the line manager, or as you've just said, internationally, people that they work with, so that there's that sharing going on. So for me, it's been fascinating. I'm very grateful for your generosity sharing this story with us today. So thank you very much for that. I know that it will just continue to grow and develop as time goes on and grow arms and legs with your leadership. And it's been an absolute delight. So thank you very much indeed. Before I go, I just want to signpost our next webinar, which takes place on the 11th of March. And really that's starting to tackle the question about what are organizations doing with people in terms of career coaching, career management in turbulent times. And that's got two sides to it. It's got the side of sometimes, dreadfully and sadly, we have to let people go, but also we have to look after the people that are left behind as well. And so we'll be joined by one of our experts, Ian Munro, to take us through that. It'll be insightful and interesting, and if I know Ian, there'll be some funny bits as well. And I invite you to join us then. Thank you to every single person who's been with us today. Have a great rest of the week and a great 2021, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, take care.
Bye-bye.